Welcome to the Airbnb Blueprint Podcast, your go-to training hub for building your very own Airbnb business. In each episode, we break down the exact blueprint that helps us build a multi-six-figure Airbnb business from scratch, and we'll show you how to do the same. Continue learning with us for free in the Airbnb Blueprint coaching community on Facebook. Find the link in our show notes below. Commit, believe, succeed. Let's go. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode. We've got Gareth and Stephanie joining us today from the InSOLVEncy Company. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Awesome to have you here. We got the amazing Pooh as well. Thanks for joining, brother.
Thank you so much. I know it's been a bit of a challenge for Stephanie to arrange for childcare as well. So thank you for doing that.
That's all right.
I had a bit of difficult morning for myself. I left the house. I woke up at 4:30. Didn't get much sleep last night, just about 4 hours, I think, with my little girl. I co-sleep with them. And then she happened to wake up again at 5 because it's a really hot morning, the journey just...
I would like to pretend that I knew about any of your struggles as parents with young kids. Got no idea.
They can always sense when you've got an important day or something next.
It's always the case, isn't it? Something's going to happen that night. And we would definitely love you, to have you guys in person, but I know it's such a long way for you. And so sometimes logistic wise, it's not quite workable. So, but thank you for coming on board.
So we're going to get into some important information here in this episode, maybe not too upbeat or exciting or happy, but stuff that kind of needs to be discussed, I think, for people who are maybe falling on some difficult times. So guys, you want to go ahead and just tell us a little bit about what you do and some of the information that you're going to bring to our listeners?
I'll start because Gareth will probably give you the more technical information today. But Gareth and I are partners at the InSOLVEncy Company. So we co-founded the InSOLVEncy Company in 2018, and we just felt that there was a real gap in the market for helping smaller business owners who just needed some real sort of practical advice. It's good listening ear. Often the situations that some businesses have found themselves in when struggling, they just needed somebody to talk to, and it would mean that they could navigate through that and not end up insolvent. Or if they were insolvent, then they needed a helping hand to go through that process. As you know, with many things in business, this included this situation, it's not something anyone's been through before. So you can only sort of speculate as to what some of the outcomes might be. So last year we were acquired. So we're now part of a company called Monahans. We've got 11 offices across the Southwest. So we've got a much bigger insolvency team. But the main thing is they all share our values in terms of wanting to help business owners. And so we wanted to come on today, having had a chat with Pooh just over the phone and sort of understanding that some of the questions that are being asked, I thought sort of Gareth and I would be able to come on and just see if we can answer some of those. As Gareth said, some of them may be in more generic terms because we need to know your specific circumstances.
Sure.
So this is the general guide, and it was just to sort of not a disclaimer, but at the moment just to say, there are people out there who can help and give you advice, and you can access that advice for free, over the telephone or a Teams meeting. So actually be proactive, have the conversation, but see what we've got to say today. And if there's anything left unanswered, then, give us a shout.
I guess it's no secret, at least what I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there been a bit of an uptick in people that are, closing down, going insolvent, losing their businesses, because it's hard times, right? A lot of people are feeling the pinch.
Definitely. I mean, to be honest, it's been busy since, you can go back to 2020 COVID times.
Yeah.
So the impact of COVID is still being felt. Then we had the energy costs, which affected a lot of, restaurant businesses, pubs, anyone that hosted events, and now this. So that there seems to be a continual challenge for businesses. Its costs are going up. It's getting more difficult just to stay in business. They're not making profit. They're just ticking along and trying to keep going.
Yeah.
Especially this last year, I think with the recent budget changes, it's become even harder. And I think in April, the cost went up again, didn't they, for NICs, etc. So it's a tough environment for businesses.
And I should add that we also, because it's not all doom and gloom, because we also do a service called MVLs, which are for businesses that are solvent, and we'll talk about that more when they'd like to close, but basically extract as much cash as possible at the, if they're retiring or stopping the business. And actually we've seen a real rise in those, again, partly because of some of the changes in the budget, but ultimately there are also businesses out there that are really successful. So I think just like to add that there is one advice, but also an element of mindset. There are still opportunities out there. It's not all doom and gloom. So,
and obviously we do tend to see the people that are struggling as opposed to those doing well.
Yeah.
Sorry, would you say like the clients who have kind of come in and approach you, is it normally left too late by any chance, or because this is something that I would say like every single business owners would not think of. This is probably one of the last topic that they would like to get involved in the early stage.
1 in 10 of our clients comes to us at a very early stage, and it's fantastic because all of a sudden they have so many more options. They've not made any of the mistakes that people often do just before a business closes. So it makes their journey much easier. It may still end up in a business closure, but there's less risk to them. They come out of it hopefully with the ability to start again and take the lessons learned forward into a new business. So the earlier you can speak to somebody, the better. And that's why doing things like this podcast today is great, because hopefully some of the tips that we give people today will stop them from making those mistakes that others have done.
I think it's our own fault for calling ourselves the insolvency company. So people come to us right at the end of the line. And actually you can have a conversation early on. And if anything, if it goes in your favour for having had that conversation. So people think if I speak to an insolvency practitioner, it looks like I'm insolvent, and then it's going to be on record. Actually, by taking that action and speaking to an insolvency practitioner is evidence that you were doing the right thing as a director, looking at all options and taking it seriously. So actually, I think you had a proper name for it, the fiduciary. Pronounce it.
A director has a fiduciary duty to the company, so they have a duty to act in the company's best interests. And seeking advice from professionals is definitely doing that. So if you get an email from an insolvency practitioner to say, we had a meeting, this is the situation, then you protect yourself.
It makes me wonder, just staying briefly on the subject of an increase in companies that are maybe, or business owners, small business owners maybe closing down, kind of a bit of a lead on from the episode that we just recorded, which was about the kind of explosion of the online training world and kind of get rich quick and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like there's been this change from, whereas in the olden days, when I say older days, maybe even just going back 10 years, let's say an example would be, I don't know, let's say a carpenter, right? So they do their apprenticeship, then they do maybe 10 years on the tools, they become an absolute expert in their trade. And then they say, okay, I'm going to go and start a carpentry business. And they're genuinely knowledgeable, passionate, they know it inside out. And there's a good chance that because of that, that business is going to be a success. Whereas now you got someone sitting at home, desperate, see a paid ad, oh, I'm going to open this business, I'm going to get rich. And 6 months later, it all goes pop. And I wonder if that's kind of added to this kind of increase in businesses closing down, small businesses.
Look, it's easier to set up businesses now than ever before.
In 5 minutes, right? It takes
it takes a couple of minutes on Companies House. You can open a bank account within a couple of minutes.
In Spain, where I live, on that subject, to open a company, it costs like 25,000 euros. So it's a huge thing. Whereas here, anyone in 5 minutes, like you just said, can open a company.
So you might be running a company and you might be a fantastic carpenter, but you might know nothing about your accounts, managing invoices, just the basics, how directors' loan accounts work, things like that. And a lot of people we see are absolutely fantastic at their particular industry, but they know nothing about the accounts and the finances. And that's where it
leads to that.
Because their accountant sees them once a year.
The businesses we're tending to see though as well actually are that are more well established, and that things, it's been kind of cumulative effect like Gareth said, but it seems to be very much things outside of their control. So illness, something that's happened that you kind of plan for, or they've had to take a bit of time out of the office for a while and things just haven't, or loss of a big client, just those things that it's just
it's an income shock, isn't it? An income shock.
But it's not necessarily their fault. Does that make sense? Because if people think, oh well, what are people going to think of me? but actually some of these things you can't plan for, or even if you plan for, there's not always a backup. If you're running a small business, especially, can you really find someone to fill your shoes, quickly or in an emergency, as much as you would try to plan? So, it's interesting anyway. We get to speak to lots of interesting people and hear their stories.
It's a really hard, especially in the UK, and I think more people are starting to feel that it's just almost like, what's the point? It's so hard. You put in so much work, make so much sacrifice, and then it's all just take from the government. You don't get any benefit, and people just think, well, I'll just stay as an employee, or I'll just stay at home on benefits because it's so much easier. That seems to be like where more help comes in. And
I'm starting to see a lot of private schools who have closed down as well because of the VAT change.
Yeah.
A lot of students are coming off from the private, to public.
Yeah, it's not just the schools; it's all of those suppliers that provide services and goods to the schools. So it'll have an impact throughout the community.
Well, our goal when we set up the business, our goal was to be able to send our children to private school, because I'd had that education and I loved it, and Gareth hadn't had that opportunity. And one of our daughters was unwell, and she just had to do a year or two in private school, and Gareth's like, wow, it really was the difference, because she was in a class of 12 and it changed her life. Yes. Put her back on course because she'd had this brain injury. And so we couldn't afford them. We've got 4. We can't afford for 4 children to go to private school. So this was when we started the business. So we were like, right, let's start a business. And that was our goal. That was our vision. And we finally got here. And now it's the equivalent of paying for 5. And like you say, it kind of, these extra challenges, even for us, we had that goal and that vision, but it just, as you finally get there, suddenly something makes it a little bit harder. But that aside, like you say, just seeing lots of people looking to move abroad. Well, you're in Spain, so well, would it be better to live outside of the UK? And I'm proud of the UK, and there's a lot of really good entrepreneurs here, so it would be great. I hope that things are going to change, because it would be great to see more support for small businesses, really.
Social media is, and I know obviously I get the algorithms and stuff appears when you watch it and stuff like that, but it seems to just be flooded right now with people just talking about leaving the UK. What's the point? I'm moving to Dubai. I'm moving to, Canada. I'm moving to Australia. I'm moving basically anywhere but here, because there's just not enough support, and it's all going against you, rather than supporting you. And it's just not a good way to, in my opinion, to grow the economy and stuff.
So I want to kind of bring it back to the situation with which we are facing right now with the short-term let market, and the recent event that happens with the recent ruling from Saunders and HMRCs. Obviously, I think for the listeners out there as well, they do catch up with, do understand what's happening with it. This change in taxation schemes, which is called TOM schemes, it's going to become abolished at some point, and it will affect a lot of operators out there. And that could potentially mean that, the companies, they might have to kind of backtrack the VATs if they become VAT registered, kind of bring the sense to the listeners.
Yeah.
If you have, let's say, 25 properties that you are operating as a short-term let, and you bring in, say, £1 million of revenue, now to be, VATable in that sense, because instead of being TOMs, where you are charged a sixth of the revenue, now you have to pay 20% of the VAT. So if you bring £1 million in, 20% of that, what is it, 200,000?
200
pounds, yeah,
20,000 or something.
Yep. And then you multiply, if you backdate it by 4 years, that's a substantial amount to be paid back. So most of the business owners wouldn't have that money putting aside for this at all. What could we do to kind of navigate through this climate at this point?
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? I mean, when was the upper tier tribunal? Was that in January?
The upper tribunal happened in January this year. I think the results came on a Valentine's Day. So February the 14th, the news came out, which I believe broke a lot of hearts. So
it's going to be a huge challenge for any business, successful or not. It's potentially a huge amount that they will have to pay, and they'll go back 4 years. I would say it's almost certain it will be retrospective. So they will go back as far as they possibly can.
Yeah.
So I think for businesses, step one is, okay, so what is this potential sum that we owe? So it's going back and doing the calculations and working that out. Obviously, there is an appeal going on, isn't there? So we don't know exactly when that will will happen. But I guess because it's gone through an upper tier tribunal, you've got to treat that as this is what it is going to be. I assume that most people are now charging VAT on the full amount.
Sonder, the company, decided to put an appeal in to go for the Supreme Court. How things are going, that you have lost the case in the upper tribunal where the judge, who is one of the most senior person in the country. So the challenge of you to turn it back around, in the next court, it's impossible. HMRC can turn around to say, look, this is what happened in the in the court case. So if Sonder happened to be able to turn that back around in the Supreme Court, they could say we can abolish the schemes anyway. But I think that still kind of makes sense for for HMRC to collect money from other people, because instead of backtracking for so and so years and then just put everybody in financial difficulties, and they wouldn't be able to retrieve anything. It just kind of make more sense to say, look, going forward from this day, that's when you have to become a VAT, to do a standard rate.
I think that would be a good outcome if they do win the case, Sonder win the case, then yes, It wouldn't be retrospective. It would just be from whenever they abolish the scheme, which would give everyone a lot of certainty. But I think because of the situation we are in, even if you're still using Tom's and you're still using that scheme, you would need to kind of keep the money to one side to prevent those sums that may be liable. And if you do that, then you're acting in the best interest of the company. If you don't, then as a director, you're effectively taking a risk which you could be personally liable for. So it's a big risk to just continue and hope that it's on the win. It would be better to provision and just in case, have that money to one side. But in terms of the business, you'd have to work out your sums and say, how much do we owe? And then it's a case of looking at the business model and saying, in this new scheme or without this scheme, is the business still viable? That's probably the most important question. Is the business viable? Forget the debt at the moment. If that debt didn't exist, will we still make money if we continue to trade?
On that note, Gareth, I don't know. He represents all the brainiacs and I represent the other side. So I'll ask the simple stuff.
He's more good looking. That's what he's trying to say.
No, but I don't want people to be listening thinking, well, I've got this really simple question, but I don't, So let's say that a real life scenario, I've got a few rent-to-rent properties. I've got $5,000 in the bank. I don't have a huge amount of debt, but with all these changes, I'm thinking, I just can't seem to make any money here. There's no margins left anymore. Can I literally just, if I've got no debt, can I just close the company down and walk away?
It's an interesting one, because if it wasn't for the case, then this potential case going on, then yes. But you've also got to factor in, we call it a contingent debt, a potential debt from HMRC. So if you look at the accounts and say, actually, I'm going to get hit with retrospective VAT of 20,000, 30,000 or more, the company's not solvent. It can't pay everyone it owes. So really, if you shut the company down, HMRC could get it, ask for the company to be restored and place it into liquidation. And then they could look at the situation and say, well, actually, the director took whatever out in dividends last year. He will need to repay those. Whether that's kind of an extreme outcome, whether they do that or not is unclear. I think when we're talking smaller businesses, they probably won't bother. But if there are larger businesses out there where the sums could be more substantial, there is a risk that would happen. I think as a director, you've got to look at the business and say, what are the possible debts that we owe? And I think because of this ruling, you have to factor in that VAT.
What determines when a company is officially insolvent? Is it when you owe more than you have in assets, or?
There's been lots of court cases around this because it's not actually a black and white scenario. So there are two types of insolvency. There is balance sheet insolvency, where, really simple as you say, you've got more debts than you have assets. And you've also got cash flow insolvency. So you can't pay a debt when it's due. So HMRC say you've got to pay this debt by this date. You cannot afford to. You might have enough assets, but it's not liquid assets. You've got it in property or other investments. But it's a balance between the two. And typically, cash flow insolvency is the one that causes the problem, because if you don't pay, they can force the company into liquidation.
Sometimes the businesses that come to us are in that position, but they know they're about to go and win, a new contract, or there's something about that. So there are, businesses often are in that kind of that point. But
a lot of businesses are classed as insolvent on paper, but they are still going and they will be successful in the future. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because they've got more debts than assets that they're not viable.
Yeah, I mean, some of the biggest companies in the world, right, like Uber and Tesla and stuff, or maybe not Tesla, but they don't really make real profits, but they're still worth billions of dollars somehow. I don't really understand it. But
it's almost like potential earnings in the future, isn't it?
Right.
It's that kind of thing. But yeah, so that's insolvency. The real what I think for most people, it's I've got a debt to pay and I can't pay it. That's the main thing.
I was going to say, and on that example, that the business who is thinking, actually, I haven't got a lot of debt. I've only got $5,000 in. Should I just close it down? What would your advice? I mean, it's difficult because what we're saying is you want specific details. But.
So technically, they should say, no, I've got a debt or a potential debt here, a contingent debt of say 50k to HMRC, so I can't do that at this stage. If they did it, who knows if HMRC would look to bring the company back. So once you close a company down, it can be brought back onto the rolls onto company's house for up to 6 years. So if you close a company, someone can ask for it to be brought back, and then they can put it into liquidation and commence a liquidation process, which would involve an investigation as to the conduct of the business.
But the realities of that, like you just said, generally in our industry, we're not talking about companies worth, 10, 20, 100 million pounds. We're talking about real small business. So the chances of them getting dragged up, slim.
Yeah, I would say the chances would be low, but it's important they're aware of the risk if they do decide to go down that route. And at this stage, like you say, there is still an appeal in progress. So it's not a case that nothing's certain. But yeah, I think for larger businesses, they've got to look at that and say, what is the provision for VAT, and take that into account.
In our line of work in particular, and again, it might come back to what I was speaking about earlier, a lot of people just kind of, not really having the real education, or maybe they've done some training that wasn't quite up to par. And they might end up in a position, we see it all the time, where people that are really working hard, doing their best, going out there, trying to make it happen. And, maybe they're getting bookings, or but they're not making money. They're not making any money. Yep. And sometimes they're losing money.
Yeah, people are drawn into like this kind of business is because of the cash flow. There's a lot of, unethical trainers out there that just kind of keep promoting all the time that if you come and train with us, you're going to have like financial freedoms by using this strategy as a vehicle to reach it. But then there's no business sense, anything to support to go with it at all. So you just come in with the mindset that, I have this strategy, it's going to work, it's going to win, it's going to be a big win.
Keep going.
And keep going, keep trying to sell the property all the time, but there's no back-end office to catch up.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, because I think it's important for maybe a lot of people who are listening that are feeling this, and it's like, okay, where's the point where it's like, okay, this just isn't working?
Yep.
And instead of just keep going until everything's gone, it's better just to kind of cut and run now. And it's like, well, what's the consequences of that?
And that's often the point that people will also go, and this is what we want to say to people, is that they'll go and get a loan that's personally guaranteed. So, currently they've probably got a limited company, the liability is separate from them as an individual, but because they get desperate, or they have a lot, or hold on, someone sold me this course, and if I buy that course or invest in that, then this is my last ditch attempt and I'm going to make it work. But at that point, then they probably had to personally guarantee it, or, something, they make a decision that isn't based in the best interest, and then it doesn't work out. And then not only are you losing your business or having to close the business down, but you then are personally liable for the funds that you borrowed. Yeah. And it's things like that again, like we say, that we often see, and that's not, that we can't really help then, because, potentially your own home is at risk and things like that. So it's much better to keep both your sort of personal and the business separate if you can. And like you say, I keep saying to get the advice early.
I think, one thing to say as well is sometimes these kind of scenarios, they're a big shock to the industry, but also it forces people to look at their business. And as you say, a lot of people aren't making money. So is it a good business model? And maybe they'll reflect now and decide to make changes. Or do something they wouldn't have otherwise done that actually enables them to be successful. So it's a bit of self-reflection,
Wake
really.
up call.
Well, what happens with what we do, and it's probably the same for all businesses, is that when people are trying to sell training around it, all they do is talk about the bookings and the money that you can generate from the booking, but then all of the outgoings and all of that stuff kind of gets brushed under the carpet a little bit. And it's only once that they're in and they're hooked that it's like, okay, great, I've got this £10,000 booking, but hold on a minute, I've got 11,000 going out on cleaners and rents and council tax and bills and maintenance, and then it's like, well, where's now with the VAT changes? It's like, where's the margins
in that situation where the businesses do need to close, and at the moment they recognise that they are insolvent and they're struggling? We were going to sort of just talk about the different insolvency options as well, just sort of just explain a bit. And
again, there's a few different types of businesses that are pots of businesses, I should say. So there'll be some businesses that they are still viable businesses. They'll still be profitable even with the VAT changes, and they can afford to pay the retrospective VAT. I don't expect there's going to be a huge number of those, but for those, they're in a great situation in that they can pay it and just continue, and they don't really need to make many changes. But there'll be some businesses that are viable, but they just can't pay. They're viable if you didn't have the debt. But they've got this debt problem. They're carrying this big, backpack of heavy debt, and that's going to drag them down if they don't solve it. And they are the ones that really do need to think about what they do, because you want to be able to rescue that business and keep it trading. So that they're the ones that really need to speak to an insolvency practitioner and kind of find out what the best options are for them. And there are a few different options they can take.
Please, can you give us some examples, please?
Yeah, I mean, number one is actually it's not an insolvency option. It's purely speaking to HMRC and getting a time to pay arrangement. So HMRC always offer this as long as you have been reasonably cooperative with them. So if you're miles behind on returns, you ignore their phone calls, and it's been 2 years, they won't allow a time to pay arrangement. But if you try and cooperate with them, they will give you time to pay. But it's not that long. We're talking really between 6 and 12 months. And when you've got a potential 4-year VAT bill that you were not expecting, it might be a challenge to come up with that money. You can get longer, but you'd have to provide cash flows and kind of be more robust in your evidence and show them that it is a genuine, viable repayment plan. And if you stick to it, then problem solved. But if you miss a payment, then they can often just pull the whole arrangement and just ask you to pay everything in full.
Coming up from this, like Saunders case, it will be a kind of debt that is not, I would say, is not payable really, because if you're talking about,
you don't have the money.
No,
money doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Yeah. So it's this sum, substantial sum to the point where it just doesn't make any business viable at all.
What you just said, Gareth, when they say, well, you missed a payment, so now you just got to pay it all. It's like, I don't have it.
It depends who you get as well. Sometimes you get an agent at HMRC who's very flexible, helpful.
Yeah.
But obviously,
they spat my water out then when you said that.
Yeah, they view it from the prism of we're collecting money for the nation to spend on our infrastructure. So they kind of focus on that side of it. They don't think about the business as much. So yeah, they will make some businesses fail to encourage other businesses to pay. If time to pay doesn't work, then you've got to kind of look at your other options, and that might be your insolvency options. And there's a couple there. So there's a company voluntary arrangement. It's a bit like a time to pay arrangement, but it's a formal insolvency agreement. It's binding. So if the creditors agree to that, it's like a repayment plan, but over a longer term.
Yeah, a lot of people know about IVAs in the personal market, where you just pay monthly, but it's a set period of time, and the company version, so CVA.
What's good about a CVA is that you remain, as the director, you remain in control of the business. You might have to show accounts and things and make payments, but you are in control and you continue to work. If that's not viable, and it's not always, then you've got other options. Everyone's heard of administration. You see the football clubs going into a pre-pack administration. So those kind of things can work for smaller businesses as well. Although they are very expensive routes to go down. Typically smaller businesses tend to do liquidation, it's like bankruptcy for businesses.
Yep.
And people assume that liquidation is the end. It is the end of that business, but very often the business owner will have a new business that they set up, and they may even acquire the assets, the trading, the name from the old business and continue.
Is there no consequence in that case? Because you are the captain of the ship, and the ship goes down. Aren't you going down with the ship? Is that
blacklisted in some way?
Yeah.
That's the benefit of limited liability. So limited liability companies exist because business is risky, inherently risky.
Yeah.
And as long as you've tried your best and you've not done anything untoward, then it's fine. And as long as you follow the correct process, you buy the assets from the liquidator at value, then there's no issue with that.
I think that's where others in like people see that happen and think, oh, how's that fair? But like in this situation, you know, nobody saw it coming. Say they had expected to pay the VAT actually, so the business cannot continue as it is. But by being allowed, as Gareth referred to, the backpack, drop the backpack with all the debt, but then start again, because actually if they get the director, the business owner can then start again, you know, they're going to be contributing to the economy. They're not going to leave the country. They're potentially going to be employing people. So yes, there was a consequence for that debt that they couldn't repay. But actually, if they take all that learning and that knowledge and then they have another go, the likelihood is they're going to be more successful the next time. So actually, we see it from that perspective of, look, learn the lessons and go do it again. Especially like you said, it's a viable business. And now we know like how the VAT needs to be applied going forward, say, you know, the new business model and make it work. So it's just interesting though, because of the perception of people out in the marketplace, because obviously you see businesses close, you know, sometimes we get like a beauty salon and people have bought vouchers and, you know, £80 vouchers, and people get, you know, obviously really upset because they bought the loved one for Christmas. And that's the sort of the consumer perception. And then you see the directors on the other side. So there's always two sides.
Sorry, but is there no like timeline that, let's say, for example, if you went bankrupt, you have to, and you can't re-enter the market, the same industry within, say, 2 years? Or
if the rights to the company name, the brand, the customer list, etc., is bought from the liquidator, from the old company, then no, you can continue as long as you have done it correctly and you followed the liquidator's like procedure. Then no, it's entirely fine. It's bought at fair value. Really, businesses typically, when they're in liquidation, there's not a lot of value there anyway, so that it doesn't cost a lot to be able to do that. There's a couple of legal steps you have to follow. You have to advertise in the London Gazette, cost £100. So there's a few legal steps you follow, but it's really straightforward to do. And it means that businesses that have failed, and where it's a viable business and it's failed, get another chance.
Yeah, and although there is a cost to that liquidation, but obviously, like Gareth was saying, the way he's explaining it, it's, you know, there are those legal steps, and if, as long as you followed them, then it will allow you then, say, to take the name or the website and to do it, but to do it properly, to do it officially, and you've got the legal backing with it. And so, although there's a cost to that process, I guess you can see why, because then it allows you to move forward. It's only when, if sort of the directors have, I suppose, if they're investigated to have sort of deliberately done some wrongdoing, or you know, sold things off at undervalue just before they were going to close, or that is when there can be consequences. So you might have seen people being disqualified or not being able to be a director for a period of time, but that's normally because of, you know, wrongdoing that they knew about, as opposed to, you know, things that have happened to them. Would that be a fair way of explaining, or could you put that in more technical terms?
So if you had a £10,000 asset and you transferred it to another company for free, that's transferring that asset away from the creditors. When a company's insolvent, as a director, you've got to act in the interests of those that are owed money. Yes. So HMRC and anyone that's owed money, you've got to act in their interests. And taking a £10,000 asset and giving it away isn't in their interests. So a director, if they did that, if a company went into liquidation, they have to pay back.
And we do see that. Personally. How far back do they investigate?
Different things will be investigated for different periods, but typically, again, if it's to a connected party, it would be 2 years. So from the point that the company is insolvent or it's gone into liquidation, they can look back 2 years.
If you can do what you're saying you can do, which is simply close the company, open another one, are you still liable for all that debt though from the old company?
The old company is liable for the debt. So HMRC VAT, it's a company that's liable. You're an entirely new company that has just bought the assets and the trading style and name, etc., from the old company. So the debts stay, the assets come along. Obviously, you've paid fair value for those assets to the old company. So anything that you pay for those assets, say you had a vehicle in the old company, you know, company vehicle, and you bought that, you'd have to pay for that vehicle if you wanted to keep use of it. And that money goes to the creditors in the old company in liquidation.
The simple answer there, though, is you're right. That money, you know, once that company is wound up, you are no longer, unless you had a personal guarantee, you were personally liable. But generally, it would just be it's the company debt. So again, that's what the insolvency practitioner would check, all things like leases and all the legal documents, just to check that things were in the company name, not in your personal name, and then advise you. So that's where we say this advice is quite general, because we would have to review all the legal documentation just to make sure we gave you clear advice on what you would be liable for and what would just be the business.
Why, if that's the case, why someone who was struggling, who did have a load of clawback of VAT, would then continue working really hard just to pay off that debt instead of just winding up and moving on?
Yeah, it might be like their lease agreements, with the holiday lets, etc. So if they have lease agreements that are long term, they've got a personal guarantee, then they would still be liable.
Yeah, I think there's, sorry, just to come back, because a few contracts for, let's say, rent to SA, say for if you take a property off the agencies, and they have to do, like credit checks and referencings, and most of the time for these companies, they would fail the referencing part. So what they would have to do is sign a personal guarantee in that case. And this is the bit where it could get...
Well, only if you were going to wind down and then open a company doing the same thing. But if you was going to go off and do something completely different, you weren't going to take on any more properties. You didn't need to pass referencing.
Correct, yeah.
It doesn't matter.
It can affect you in some industries as well, can't it? But like for accountancy and things, sometimes...
As an insolvency practitioner, I can't liquidate my company and set up a new one. They probably won't license me. So certainly are affected. Yeah. But yeah, if those businesses that aren't viable, then they don't even have the issue of trying to buy the assets, etc. It's just a case of my business is no longer viable and I've not got the money to pay them. Therefore, liquidation is most likely the right thing to do because it will wipe off all that VAT debt. Anything that I have personally guaranteed, it doesn't, I'll still have to pay that personally. Yeah. And if, for example, after the upper tier ruling, I continue to, follow the Tom scheme and didn't really provision for any VAT, I didn't keep the VAT back, I could potentially be personally liable for that in some circumstances. I don't know if you've heard of personal liability notices. So they are where HMRC think that you have either been negligent or deliberately not paid them. And therefore they can take a company debt like the VAT and make it personal. And in those situations, you wouldn't be able to walk away from that debt. But prior to the upper tier tribunal, I can't imagine that would be possible. But after that point, I think if anyone continued to operate on that scheme, they have a risk of potential liability. Yeah. And that's personal.
It's a subject you can just, we could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, couldn't we? But what's the time frame? I know you briefly touched on it in the beginning, but if someone's listening and they're like, yep, I'm in this exact situation, VAT changes, I've got 10 rent-to-rents, I'm struggling, I don't want to do this anymore, I don't owe anybody a huge amount of debt, but I do think that maybe I want to look at winding this up. What's the time frame that they should give themselves to approach someone like yourselves, start getting advice and do things in the right way that's going to have the most minimal effect?
I think as soon as possible, really. They want to get the figures and get an understanding of what their situation is. So they may want to speak with their accountant and work out what their liabilities are, what they owe. Once they've got that information, book an appointment with an insolvency practitioner, have a conversation, because the sooner you do, the sooner you're aware of your options. And also you'll be told, do not do this, don't do that. So you'll avoid risks that you may otherwise walk into.
And that sort of links to what you were saying about some sort of slightly less or ethics of people as well. But in terms of speaking to an insolvency practitioner, if you go on the .gov website, you can find the licensed insolvency practitioners, because when there's a case like this, there are a lot of middlemen or middle people who will see there's money to be made and there's people who are desperate. So they will try and capitalize on that. So our recommendation would be to go onto the .gov website and just make sure you've got a licensed insolvency practitioner, because a lot of people think they know because they went through this once, as opposed to, and also it will mean that any advice they do get is regulated and insured. Again, in this situation, if you're doing something and taking advice, you want to make sure that it's officially insured. So it was just that sort of not a pitch for us. That's more just general terms.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because I wouldn't know. You just go out there and do a Google. You don't know. So there's a governing body that licenses you guys and make sure that you're legit.
Yeah, there's been some companies recently that have been closed down because they were saying, "Oh, don't worry, we can sort your debt and we can sort it all out for you, make it disappear for you." And they weren't following the correct guidelines, and then ultimately the directors, like Gareth said, they can then end up still getting into trouble. So as always in this life, you don't know until, but yeah, so the government website, you can just put in find an insolvency practitioner. So.
Yeah, and most insolvency practitioners will give free initial advice. So they don't need to worry about that, just to get an idea of what their situation is.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. I mean, it's some irony in it, I guess, but if I'm going to come and have a meeting with you, it's because I'm in a really bad financial position. So, what's the kind of fees like? What's it going to cost me to get this help? Who pays it?
That was one of our things, and everyone seems to do it now a lot, but was that we really wanted to offer that. I mean, Gareth you get a bit tired, don't you? Because we're quite busy, but we do still pride ourselves on that free initial advice. And Gareth always writes a written report with his recommendations afterwards as well. And we've done that right from the beginning. In terms of then if you choose to liquidate, so our fee tends to be around £6,000, but ultimately that often is paid out of the assets of the business. So usually it's not actually, again, the director having to find the money. There's normally something within the business.
It's typically the creditors that pay for that, because any money in the pot goes towards the creditors. So we ask the creditors for permission to have a fee. Yep. So in the vast majority of cases, it is the creditors that pay. You will get the odd client where they've got zero assets, they've got lots of debt. And then the question is, do they even need to liquidate? They should, because that's the correct route, but can they afford to? And there's no rule that says the director has to put more money into a business to close it. So they end up in a bit of a limbo, kind of like they can't liquidate and they can't afford to continue. So you sort of wait for Companies House to strike them off after a few years.
Yeah, we set up a service where we were trying to help people in that situation, because we're finding a lot of businesses just couldn't afford the 6,000. So we were liaising, and we still do. We still offer that, but at the moment they're not. It's the process just they seem to get to the point where they're not getting struck off. So something that we used to do, but again, just because we think more companies seem to be being investigated. So if people can afford to officially liquidate with an insolvency practitioner, unfortunately, it is the preferable route. Even as I say, we tried to create, we've got a service that fills that kind of, but it's like a grey area, like so much with these situations.
Okay.
We have a couple of potential suggestions that directors can take as well. Is it worth just mentioning those now?
Oh, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. So things that people often do, especially when they're thinking their business may need to close, they will think, oh, I've got for example, a director's loan account. I owe the company, because you take your money out each month, don't you? And then at the end of the year, your accountant does your distributions, your dividends, and they will try and clear off that director's loan account just before a liquidation. And that can often cause a problem, because it's effectively you're preferring yourself over HMRC. So you've paid yourself off, or you've dealt with that, you've declared a dividend to get rid of that debt, and HMRC are the ones that are suffering. So anything like that, they should speak with an insolvency practitioner before they do it, because there are ways to deal with these things that are correct, and it won't land them in any difficulties or in any trouble. So looking at directors' loan accounts, dividend payments, those kind of things, if you're thinking that your business needs to close, check first before you take any action.
Yeah.
If you do it the wrong way, you end up personally liable. So it's worth having a conversation. Any tips from yours?
We talked about just don't renegotiate any leases if you've got them at this point. Get advice before you do, again, because they get that implication. And we talked about loans with personal guarantees or anything else with a personal guarantee. Again, get advice before you sign it. The number of people that come to us don't even realise they've got the personal guarantee until we say it's here on your paperwork. Yeah. So it's like you were saying, people are really good at their job, but they might not have that attention to detail for legal paperwork, which completely understandable.
And an important one, and people often try to be too helpful or open with their investors and shareholders, because you might communicate, we've got this difficulty, but you've got to be mindful about where that information will go. So if you've got a bank account with an overdraft and they find out that your business is in difficulty, they may pull the overdraft. That might mean a viable business all of a sudden has to close, or your landlord may, start to adhere to the letter of the lease rather than be flexible and allow repayments, outside of that. So you've just got to be mindful that if people become aware that the company is at risk of insolvency, they will stop dealing with you.
Yeah, it's a real shame. Traditionally, you would have spoken to your account manager at the bank and got some advice. But as I say, that the number of people that we've seen that they potentially could have saved the business, or they had options available to them. But once your account's frozen, there's not much you can do, and it can just be the tipping point. So it's just, again, I know it sounds, we don't need, because it's a shame, because we'd like, but I guess maybe it's the sort of the world in the current day now. People, that it's risk, isn't it? It's all about the risk.
Yeah. So just try and not tell anyone until you've decided on the path that you're going to take.
Have you got any more burning questions, Pooh?
No, like I said, my trousers are wet. So no, it's been an amazing session. Yeah, thank you so much. So we were really humbled to have you guys on board with us, and to give a lot of information to other people, so they can take the right approach for it if it comes to their
guys. What we'll do is we'll put all of Gareth and Stephanie's information in the show notes with all of your company information, all your contact information. So if you've got any questions, like Gareth said, you can get some free advice. They can help you, leave yourself plenty of time. If you are in that position, it's not great, but it seems like these guys can definitely, make the best of a bad situation. So really, really appreciate you guys coming on.
Thank you. And we'll be looking at hoping that the ruling goes in everyone's favour. So we are still hoping for the best, I think, everyone.
Is there any last bits that you want to add, guys? Any more important bits that maybe we didn't touch on? Or
try and stay positive. And even if the worst happens and you have to restructure, you have to change your business, you've learned so much from the journey that you're now, it's better than any kind of education you can get, isn't it? Formal education. So take that forward and be successful in the future.
Yeah, and I think the mental health impact of these things, the uncertainty, a legal challenge, your business, your livelihood is actually really huge for people. And just know that there's other people out there who've been through this and they've come out the other side. There is support available, so you don't go through this alone. And I think that's a really key message. Money, everything else can be sorted if you take care of the person. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to share that.
Yeah. Appreciate that. And just to finish up, that's a really important note, is that, if you've started a business, it's your first business, and it doesn't work out for whatever reason, remember that the most successful people out there went bankrupt, bust, lost everything, lived in their cars, homeless 10 times before they made it. So,
Gonna keep trying.
Get up and dust yourself off. So great advice, guys. Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll see you all next week on another episode of the Airbnb Blueprint Podcast. See you then.